I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Bowling Green Board of Commissioners for March 6, 2018. Invite you to stand if you choose as Commissioner Williams provides invocation and then leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
If you choose to, bow and pray with me, please. Our blessed Father, we thank you for this another day. We thank you for the opportunity to gather here. We'd ask your blessings on the proceedings and our efforts to do thy will. Bless each and every one that lives in this community. And stay with us as we contemplate all the things that are before us this evening. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Perigin.
Here.
Commissioner Williams.
Here.
Commissioner Denning.
Here.
Commissioner Nash.
Here.
Mayor Wilkerson.
Here, do we have any awards or recognitions tonight?
Not that I'm aware of.
Any from the Commission? We have a need for a closed session under City Manager comments.
We do have a need for a closed session. Ms. Jackson will read the exception.
Pursuant to KRS 61810F, discussions or hearings which might lead to the appointment of an individual employee, this exception shall not be interpreted to permit discussions of general personnel matters in secret.
Second.
Motion by Nash, second by Williams. Is there any discussion? Please call the roll.
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Denning.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
Yes. I missed a recognition. Go ahead.
Well, I almost forgot. Congratulations to the Lady Purples basketball team who qualified to go to the state tournament this year. We wish them well.
Yes. And Region 4 will be decided tonight from a team from Bowling Green or Warren Central. So,
Yeah, I'd love to go, but
any other comments? All right. Approval of the minutes from our regular meeting on February 20th, 2018.
So moved.
second,
Motion by Nash, second by Denning. Is there any additions, deletions, or corrections? Please call the roll.
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Denning.
yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
Yes. First item is the second reading of ordinance BG 2018, number 9.
Ordinance denying rezoning of real estate. Ordinance rejecting recommendation of the City County Planning Commission and denying rezoning tracts of land containing 4.3658 acres from RE Residential Estate and Floodplain to RM4 Multifamily Residential and F Floodplain located on Old Scottsville Road, presently owned by MFG Bowling Green Land, LLC.
So moved.
Second.
Nash, second by Williams. Just as a reminder to the commission, where we are in this particular ordinance is that the ordinance in both its first and second reading on approving the rezoning recommendation Planning Commission was rejected. So this is the second reading of an ordinance denying that recommendation. So a yes vote is to deny the rezoning on Old Scottsville Road. Any other discussion? Please call the roll.
Perigin.
No.
Williams.
Yes.
Denning.
Yes,
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
No. Second reading of ordinance BG 2018, number 10.
Ordinance rezoning real estate. Ordinance rezoning tracts of land containing 3.27 acres from RS1A single-family residential to RM3 multifamily residential located at 1011 Campbell Lane and the end of Mohawk Road, presently owned by 34 Properties, LLC and Harlan Gray Investments, LLC.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Perigin, second by Williams. This is a second reading of an ordinance that passed on a 3-2 vote last time. Is there any comments or discussion?
I know that there are several people here. I want to make sure before I address any comments, that we would open comments to the floor on this particular issue. Are there citizens that would like to speak on this particular issue?
I know you were here last time, but remind me of your name, please.
Lena Hunley,
Yes, ma'am.
1211 Shady Court.
Yes, ma'am.
I understand last time why you denied my request for new hearing based on procedural irregularities. I know that the main concern was cost, and here's why I think that that was not a good call. Developers can keep bringing proposals as many times as they want. Every time they get turned down, they can just go bring a new proposal. And so developers can run up the cost as much as they want, and citizens should also have a chance to redress things. Developers have a motivation to time their new requests in a manner to diminish neighbors' participation, and that's the kind of gamesmanship that was used here. We went from a well-attended meeting in July 2017 in which the RM4 proposal was for 33 units, with the Planning Commission voting against it 6-4, to a January meeting with poor weather, lighting, timing. We have a lot of elderly neighbors in our neighborhood who really just could not get out, flu season, etc. And they brought a proposal that was substantively the same. The only difference was that they changed it to RM3 and changed it from 33 units to 32 units. They didn't address any of the neighborhood's concerns. So why should a developer bother to address our concerns if they can just bring a new proposal that's basically the same the next time, and they can just keep doing this until they succeed? The developer's attorney said something really interesting at the January Planning Commission hearing. He said that their proposal was the best that they could make and still make a profit. Respectfully, that's not the standard for whether the zoning should be changed for a property. If the developer paid too much for the property at the end of Mohawk, which we know he did, we should not be rewarding his speculation with a zoning change that is inappropriate for the neighborhood and harms the neighbors that bought in a developed neighborhood zoned RM1 filled with single-story ranch homes. I previously spoke about all the ways that this change does not comport with the standards that are supposed to govern such changes, and I hope you will not be a rubber stamp for the Planning Committee. It's not too late to change your votes and to vote this down. Lastly, the city attorney downplayed the effect of their attorney bringing up new evidence in his closing arguments, stating that the Planning Commission shouldn't have relied on evidence regarding renters, as it would be illegal to discriminate based on rental status. However, we don't know whether the Planning Commission considered those things or not. The attorney doesn't know. We don't know if those were things that they considered, and since we don't know whether they disregarded such evidence, since the Planning Commission never said they were going to discard such evidence, their decision may well be tainted. A new meeting would have helped level the playing field between developers and their gamesmanship and the local residents, and I wish what had happened at the July planning meeting had been introduced into evidence so that you could see all the people that commented and were concerned, but simply couldn't make it out in January with the poor weather and other concerns. So I'd ask that you vote against this zoning change.
Excuse me, Blake Hungley, 1211 Shady Court. I have one question for the person who is trying to put the apartments on the area. Can I ask this question?
I'll ask me the question, and I'll determine
Okay.
whether or not it's appropriate to.
They said that at the last meeting, they said that there would be something like cards so that citizens could go through the apartments. But my question is, did it mean residents of the apartment, or did it mean residents of the street?
I don't know what you're referring to. So that I don't know that would be an appropriate question
The
for
gate.
us to consider. You're talking about who can go through the gate?
Yeah.
I'll let you answer that question if you want to, Mr. Davenport.
Mr. Wilkerson, I think, good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. The young man is asking, I think, a clarification about what gated access means and controlled access. And I think, consistent with my prior presentation, the access would be allowed for the residents and emergency personnel.
Understood. Anyone else?
Tracy Duff. I spoke at the last meeting. I just, again, request that you all think about the traffic issues that are going to be caused by this vote. If you vote to approve this plan, By their proposal, it'd be up to 80 new vehicles that have to come down Mohawk, because they're not gonna try to come out on Campbell Lane with the right in and right out only. They will have to come out on Mohawk several times a day. But not only that, but if this property gets rezoned, that opens the door for the adjacent properties to be rezoned and joined in for additional vehicles to be pushed down our street. So it's not just 80 vehicles multiple times a day. If this one gets rezoned, there's nothing stopping the two properties next to it to be rezoned, attached into this, and be hundreds of vehicles pushed down our street. I hope that maybe you have taken the time since our last meeting to maybe go to this property and see that between the Shy property and the Paulson Alley property where the skate's gonna be, there's really no space between the dead end, the stub, and where Thimblefinger meets. The people are gonna be caught up by that gate, coming in and out, and then once they turn on to Thimblefinger, if they don't go all the way down Mohawk, there's just not enough room for hundreds of extra cars per day. And when they do go down Mohawk, that's just additional traffic through our neighborhood that is unnecessary and can be stopped by you all. So I ask you to please really think about how this will affect this established neighborhood where these duplexes are gonna add traffic to our neighborhood, not necessarily just on Campbell Lane, but the majority of the traffic is gonna come into our neighborhood. Thank you.
Mayor, if it would be appropriate for me just to quickly address those, Chris Davenport, on behalf of the owner of the property. First point I'll make, not just a developer, but the owner. To address Ms. Duff's comments, I think that's been done ad nauseum. Traffic was discussed at length at the hearing. Frankly, it was discussed at length at your body's last hearing. Those same concerns, they had been vetted to both applicable transportation authorities, and these are exactly what those bodies said need to be done improvement-wise. Last thing I'll say with regard to the concern of Ms. Hundley, you've had 2 hearings before you on this case. There was a hearing before the Planning Commission. I'm happy to find a point of agreement with the opposition in this case, and that is what you should not consider zoning cases based upon. I agree. This body should not consider zoning cases based upon profitability of owners or uses. It does not say that in the zoning ordinance, and I would never advocate that as the basis. Likewise, this body should not base zoning decisions based upon the loudest person in the room, the most people in the room, the age of a witness that testifies before you. What this body is to decide zoning cases on is the basis of the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance that's passed in this locality. And in this case, and I'll end with this, Mayor, I'll reiterate to you, this use that my client intends to use his property with is consistent with the flume. It's consistent with the future land use map. What prevents the slippery slope argument that you heard from Ms. Duff is the future land use map that has been adopted. As the proof was at the hearing, the properties to which she speaks do not share the same classification as this property. So that's a simple answer to that concern. That's how legislatively we've addressed these issues in our community. Secondly, I'll reiterate, this is an application that passed 7-1, and that when asked, the staff of the Planning Commission said they could not find a single policy in the comprehensive plan that was not fulfilled with this application. I'll rest my argument on those facts, and thank you all for your time.
Question, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Davenport. What is the difference in the plan between when it was presented the first time to Planning and Zoning and it was defeated, and the second time when it was approved?
The first difference was the classification, zoning classification. RM4, which is the highest intensity zone classification for multifamily that we have in the zoning ordinance. So that was amended to RM3, which is a far less intense use. Now, the neighbors may say, well, but the original application had 40, and then it was changed to 33, and then 32. So what real difference does RM4 have versus RM3? I will tell you that numerous times before the Planning Commission that I've been involved, including this case, the commissioners in your Planning Commission don't like to tag something RM4 if RM3 will work. And the question then becomes why? And it's because Ms. Duff's argument, the slippery slope. There is RM4 in that neighborhood already in that area. But when you have more RM4, it begets more RM4. At least that's the argument I hear sometimes from the planning commissioners. So whereas RM4 allows 3+ stories, it allows up to, I think, plus 80% land usage. RM3 has much less intense. It's capped at 2 stories. This development has brick, not required under RM4. This development is capped at 50% green space, as opposed to 20. They have to have 50% green space. So there's no simple answers, I'm afraid, whenever I'm before this body, and I apologize for that. But that would be the first thing I would point out to you, Commissioner Nash.
So I understand the difference in asking for the zoning classification. What were the actual differences in the property? Were they planning on building 3 stories and now they're planning on building 2, or were they always planning on building 2 and now they're still building 2?
Oh, they never planned on building 3 stories, Commissioner, but the application of the difference is this. A year from now, 2 years from now, if there's someone across Campbell Lane, if there's someone across Small House Road, if there's someone in the vicinity generally, and by that I mean not necessarily adjacent, but in the vicinity. And when you watch Planning Commission hearings, you see that the staff will always put up that aerial, and they'll show the uses, the zone uses in the area generally. And RM4 will have one color, and RM3 will have another. And when RM4 gets that color, whether it's red, yellow, or blue, there's not a designation of, but they capped at 2 stories. And they obligated to 50% green space, and they obligated these things. And so I think as part of the process, the staff presents cases in that way to prevent the slippery slope argument. Those are safeguards that are put into place when we try to compare what cannot be apples to apples. Every development is different, but we try to maintain those standards so that when we look at the map, we can see, is that already in the area?
So I understand the difference between RM4 and I understand the difference between RM3. I understand that by moving this to an RM3, it does something for future development. My question is, what changed, if anything, about this development between when it went before Planning and Zoning and was defeated and when it came back before the same group and it was approved? What were any substantial changes to the actual development?
I guess we're going to disagree whether RM3 classification is substantial. I would tell you it is.
You're telling me about a classification. I'm
Yes, sir.
asking for the plans that are submitted to build buildings, the way in which the property is going to be developed with brick and mortar. Were there any changes between the first meeting and the second meeting?
The one I know is there was a downsize in the unit. And again, we went from 40 to 33 to 32. And the reason we went with 32 was the increased green space. So when I say 33 to 32, okay, somebody might say, well, that's not real significant. What that does from a development perspective is increases your green space, decreases your lot usage, increases your setbacks. So from an engineering standpoint, all those things flowed from going from 40 to 33 to 32. Now, from a design standpoint, I believe the townhomes were always envisioned to be 80% brick. They were always capped at 2 stories. They always contained a 1-car attached garage. And I mean, I can contrast that with RM4. None of that would be an RM4. But those things were always planned, as far as, at least since my involvement, I can tell you that.
So if I understand right, 8 less units.
Correct.
And that's the significant difference between the first meeting and the second meeting.
I mean, that's a 20% reduction by my math. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
May I speak to that? Just at the July meeting, they changed it to 33. So it was always 33 before it was ever voted on. That was the very first thing they did. So don't get confused by this 40 units versus 32. It was always 33 versus 32 from the beginning of that meeting because they orally amended it. That's what was being debated. They never voted on 40. It was always voting on 33. Thank you.
Mr. Davenport, is that accurate?
Yes, I don't think that's contrary to what I just stated. We went
Okay.
from 40 to 33 to 32 throughout the process.
So from the vote at the planning and zoning, I'm just looking for accuracy here. I'm not trying to argue with anyone. They were voting on 33 units and it was defeated.
That's correct.
And then you came back with
And
32 units and it was approved.
And I'll tell you, if you want to get into that, and now this is a touchy subject with me because this is not necessarily the subject of the hearing that was held. That being said, at the night of the first vote in July, and I know you were involved in that point, Commissioner, because I know you had joined the opposition's Facebook page at that point.
Sure.
So I know your stance on this all the way back to July, unfortunately.
Sure. But
That being said-
Now wait a second, because I believe what you're doing there is you're calling into question my credibility or my ethics by saying that I joined the opposition. I sought advice from Gene Harmon, the city's attorney, about what I could and could not do concerning planning and zoning cases. As an elected official, I am not prohibited from joining a Facebook group. I'm not prohibited from going out to the site. I have been very clear in emails. I've been very clear in phone calls. There are people that are in the room who have been upset with me that I won't express an opinion on this other than here. So you're correct, but please don't call into question my ethics.
No, Commissioner, the point of my stating that is that I know that you're aware of what the application was.
I'm trying to get it on the
Because
record.
your involvement, because you knew that, okay? Now, that being said, since we're going to talk about the first hearing, you want to hear about that.
Sure.
Commissioner Volker sat right in that chair and commented RM4 is not a proper classification. He questioned why this was being asked for RM4. Point blank.
Okay.
And so if the point of these questions are to try to speculate why the Planning Commission would turn down one application and not recommend another, I think that's a very slippery slope for this body because you've got one recommendation to act upon, not two. You've got one recommendation that was revised, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion. And I don't hold an opinion with regard to the other stuff that you're mentioning. That's not my forte. I don't know about that. Mr. Harmon would, and I wouldn't doubt it, whatever he may say. But on this issue, it's my opinion that zoning classification was a quintessential part of that application that the commissioners had concerns about and likely led to that vote. Now we'll never know. But again, back to the point that we are here. We've got a revised application that has gone through the process, that is outlined in the comprehensive plan, receives a 7-1 vote, and the staff, our professional staff, this city's professional staff, commented and opined there was not a single policy that was not fulfilled under the comprehensive plan. That, to me, is a strong recommendation from the staff that an application could ever get. Not a single policy and requirement was not fulfilled. So in that context, on what basis could the application not satisfy the comprehensive plan? And that's why I go back to my first point. We don't decide, now, in some legislative circumstances, there may be issues that are straight and just absolutely political, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and you don't have the kind of the outline of how you're to decide certain issues. That happens probably more often than not with this body. In this case, where you are sitting in a quasi-judicial function, and the question before you is whether the application, as recommended by the Planning Commission, conforms to the ordinance that has been passed. And the staff says in every way they can issue an opinion, it does. And then that recommendation was adopted by your Planning Commission.
Excuse me, I think that's a misrepresentation of the staffing report.
And we have the staff report here. I don't need you to interpret.
It just- it
You've-
says
you've-
may
you've
and should.
spoken
It doesn't
twice.
say does,
Please step
okay?
back. Thank you.
Okay.
The information that was brought forward by Mr. Nash and Mr. Davenport is in page 5. The big paragraph at the bottom where he talks about going from 40 to 33 to 32 units. So that information is in the record. Planning Commission did on that part of it. Yes,
And
ma'am.
Hello, I'm sorry I came up so early. I'm Diana McQuady, 1002 Edgefield Way. I spoke about traffic last time. I don't think that is an unimportant subject. I kind of sensed that earlier, not from you, but it's very important. If you traffic on paper is one thing, traffic driving in it every day is another. And when we talk about people coming out of the apartment complex, when we talk about that, we're talking about them coming out numbers of times a day, and we've never even mentioned, I don't believe, guests of theirs coming in and out, having a party or whatever, and then of course, just service type people. I also want to say one more thing about something that was just said, and that is that yes, the staff gave their opinion, the staff at P&Z gave their opinion. Yes, Planning and Zoning heard what they heard and they voted. But as Ben Peterson, the Executive Director of the Planning and Zoning staff, said recently at the Town Hall, there are 3 different bodies making decisions. Each of those bodies is separate. Each of those bodies is escalating. I ask that you make a decision today in favor of the opposition. Thank you.
Is there any other?
I have more comments and questions. For
Wait
the,
a minute. You wanna
oh,
take care
you
of
mean
your
from the
people?
public? I'm sorry.
No,
You looked at me. I apologize.
Well, I was going that route, but
I apologize.
didn't know anybody else was coming.
Yes.
One more time, yes, sir.
Donald Travis. Again, my concerns are not with the planning and zoning's original method of setting it up. My concern is the rezoning of a residential property at the end of Mohawk Drive. The one that is on Campbell Lane should be zoned as it is and allowed the apartments to be built. But the section that they happen to buy and then have rezoned as from a residential to a commercial section only allows them to get onto Mohawk. Also, the traffic on Small House, I live on Small House Road, right at the end of Thimblefinger, and I cannot get out of my driveway in less than 10 minutes between 4:30 and 6 o'clock because of the traffic that comes through in both directions.
Dean, do you have something?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Gene Shai, 2444 Mohawk Drive. I've got to go back just a little bit, and I'll be brief, I promise. Mr. Davenport has correctly stated that no traffic study was required due to the number of units. Going back to the first P&Z meeting that denied the development application by a 6-4 vote, Mr. Davenport has proudly proclaimed that both the city and the state had approved traffic studies for this project.
Dean, I'm going to have to interrupt you because your comments had to do with generally in May and not necessarily on I apologize. I get the rest of it. Go ahead. I apologize.
All right, thank you. That's all right. We all. Anyway, we have found out now that both of these agencies, the state DOT and the city traffic engineers, have said no such studies exist. Additionally, at the last P&Z hearing, Mr. Davenport presented a map depicting rental property in the neighborhood. That map was incorrect, but we were not allowed any rebuttal. A good number of the properties were inaccurately colored in as rentals. By Mr. Davenport's own words, this information was based on the fact that property tax bills were not mailed to the address listed. Our tax bill, as well as many others, are delivered to our mortgage holder and paid out of an escrow account. Yet this map was accepted as true. Without knowing the source of Mr. Davenport's other information, I'm not sure if this is fabrication or misrepresentation.
I will tell you that's not a consideration of what we're doing tonight. We won't consider that.
Okay, that's fine, but like I said, many of these decisions have been based on this information.
No, sir.
And, well, okay. Just these 2 items alone anyway, or just this one item that we consider, that being the phantom traffic study, and other flawed information makes us wonder what other information presented by Mr. Davenport may be misrepresented. As a citizen of Bowling Green and as a resident of Shawnee area, which encompasses Churchill and Allendale Heights, I am disturbed by these blatant inaccuracies. Additionally, if I were sitting on the City Commission or the P&Z Board, I would take it as a personal affront that an educated professional such as Mr. Davenport would misrepresent fact in such a manner. It's one thing to lose on a level playing field. However, it is another to think that I or my neighbors were cheated during this process. Additionally, we have been given assurances that traffic will be controlled, yet we have no details. We've been told there will be a gate of some sort, but it is difficult to see just exactly how that's going to lessen impact on the neighborhood. What is this gate going to be? Is it going to be a pressure-sensitive gate? Is it going to be an optic gate? We don't know. But the problem that we see will be drivers coming off of Campbell Lane when it's congested, driving through this development and driving through our neighborhood as a funnel out to the other avenues on Small House or Cave Mill or somewhere else. So that small degree of traffic impact that we're told we're going to have is most likely going to increase to something that's probably going to be intolerable for the neighborhood. You know, we went through this with Hilltop Place, which we were told would be a senior living development, and it's gone through several transitions. We have trash, we have gunshots, we have fights. We presented police call records that are substantial from that residential area, and we don't want to see the same thing happen, and that's what we fear. Other than that, I just implore you all to please reconsider, think through this process, and give this neighborhood an opportunity to exist. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Was there anybody else?
Just a comment. First of all, I don't think that Mr. Davenport would lie pertaining to this project. He represents his clients who are trying to do something in the neighborhood. But as far as Mr. Davenport shooting straight, I believe it. I always have, and regardless of how I vote, my vote won't be based on anything negative pertaining to Mr. Davenport. I've known him for many years. He wouldn't do that. He is representing his client as he would anyone else in this room.
Anyone else in the room? Last chance. Yes, sir, come ahead.
My name is Henry Thompson. I live at 1213 Shawnee Way, also known as the reservation. I don't really have a dog in this fight, but I do respect the homeowners that do have. And I'd like to make a few comments, and it'll be a little history lesson for all of us.
Thompson, I had a...
Sir?
You kind of put me on the spot because you didn't speak at the first hearing, so I don't know that I can let you speak now. Let me make sure that
First
is that correct?
hearing?
We've taken a position for the last several, I guess, planning commission appeals or to the city commission, that as long as you're making a decision based on a record before the planning commission, then you're going to restrict yourself to the record before the planning commission, which included only allowing those people to speak who spoke at the planning commission.
I was looking here, Mr. Thompson. I don't see you. You weren't at the planning commission, were you, sir?
Sir?
You were not at the planning commission, were you?
No, sir, I was sitting in front of my TV watching you.
Okay. I'm sorry, we have to vote on what's on the record, and the people that have spoken have been coming up to summarize what their
Well, now,
comments were.
Excuse me, do I have to speak on this subject?
You can't speak on this subject.
Can I
I'm
speak
sorry.
on any subject?
Not right now.
No, okay, excuse me then.
We'll have a public comment section at the end of the meeting.
All right, sir.
I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, that's just the way the law is set up for us to consider this. Was there someone else?
I'm Todd Kinchelow. I live at 2501 Small House Road. I'm at the corner of Thimblefinger and Small House. And
Right.
One of the concerns we have is, of course, of the value of our homes. We're single-family homes, and my house does not look anything like these townhomes. I live in a house that was built back in the 50s. J.C. Kirby used to live in my house. It's a well-known house in the city. A lot of people say how pretty it is. They think it's wonderful. They'd love to see the inside of it, and never once do I hear them say, gosh, you know what would really make that house look nice? Put a lot of apartments next door to them. You don't ever hear that statement. So I guess I have a question of each of the members. Can you explain to me how putting in apartments into a single family neighborhood increases the value of our home? How can you protect the value of our home?
At this point, all we can do is deliberate on the evidence that we've been presented. If someone wants to make a comment about that when our deliberations, then they're welcome to do that, but this wouldn't be the appropriate point to do it.
But it's appropriate to us on the concern of the value of our homes. And I would think part of your job as elected officials are to protect the citizens. And there's a whole lot more people in here that are affected by the price of their homes than one individual wanting to make a profit by putting in apartments where they don't belong. So can you kind of help me understand why you think that is a good fit for the neighborhood?
Those your comments then, sir?
That's my question.
Okay. If somebody wants to address that in their comments as we close, we can. I don't know that anybody will, or they're all welcome to.
And for a neighborhood that already has traffic problems, it doesn't make sense to bring in more traffic. We already have a portable police radar in there. We had somebody crash through our brick sign for Shawnee recently. So do we need more traffic in there? Absolutely not. The answer is when people are crashing through brick signs and the police already have a speeding problem and they have a portable radar detector in the neighborhood, the thought process is protect your citizens. Don't put more traffic in that neighborhood that's already got issues.
Is there anybody else? Mr. Davenport?
If I may, and I don't wanna-
Before you go, let me make
Yes.
sure. Is there anybody else that's going to make a comment? Because I'm going to end it here with Mr. Davenport. Okay, Mr. Davenport. Wait a minute. Here we got over here. Huh? Did you speak at the planning and zoning hearing, sir? I did. Tell me your name again.
My name is Dave Scott. Family lives at
Yes.
2505 Mohawk Drive.
Yes, sir. Okay.
And I have to kind of echo the previous speaker's thoughts that Shawnee Estates is a single-family housing subdivision in the city, and it appears to me that it's in the best interest of the city to protect the value of the existing properties. And I don't want to say anything about the people that might live in the apartments, people in different stages in their life, and young or old or different family situations may live in a single family house. They may live in an apartment complex. That's not the gist of my comments at all. But if I was looking to buy a house in Bowling Green, I would certainly look for a certain style of appropriate housing. And if you want to be confident that your investments are safe and secure and you know, a smart investment, you look for investments that are not going to be changed. And certainly, if you are looking for single-family housing, you're not looking for something with an apartment complex right next door to it. So I think you have to consider it's, I mean, just an economic interest of the city to protect the value of the housing in the city. And I think this change is in opposition to there was a stated goal in your long-term plan that said you're going to protect existing subdivisions. And certainly, I think Shawnee Estates is, it's kind of a hidden jewel in Bowling Green. It's a great location. Those are great housing units for, you know, starter families, but you're right in the middle of everything. So it's kind of a hidden jewel right there. And I think that there's nothing about making this zoning change that protects or supports that subdivision.
All right, thank you, Mr. Scott. All right, I don't see anybody else that'll be standing forward. Mr. Davenport?
Mayor, thank you. I'll be very brief. Commissioner Denny, thank you for those comments. I personally appreciate those. We can all have disagreements, but that doesn't mean we have to malign anyone. That being said, Mr. Shaw, I think, raised a point that I would like to make sure this commission is clear about, and that has to do with the traffic study issue. And I think this was discussed at your last meeting. I know it was discussed before the Planning Commission. Mr. Shaw makes the comment that there was never a traffic study performed. He is correct about that. He makes a statement that this development was not intensive enough to require a traffic study. He is correct about that. I think what he misunderstands is the process that is followed by the Planning Commission. If you have a development more than 50 units, you are required to get a traffic study. If you are required to get a traffic study, you can get around that if you have the appropriate authorities look at your development and issue a letter of what improvements must be made in order to waive the study. And so what I have presented to this body, as well as the Planning Commission, is that although we did not trigger either the study or the equivalent waiver procedure, my client reached out to the DOT and the City of Bowling Green Transportation folks and essentially went through the waiver process, even though that was not required, even though they didn't have 50 units, even though they could have brought this application without doing that. It was through the waiver process that was not required, but my client did anyways, that the state said, we would like to see these traffic improvement measures, in which my client obligated himself to do. So there's never been a statement by me that I'm aware of, or by anyone else, that there was a traffic study done. What has been represented throughout this process is, albeit it was not required, my client went through the waiver process, and although it was not required, he obligated himself to make those improvements that were indicated from those authorities. So I'd just like to clear that issue up so that everyone understands it's not as simple as you always do a study or you never do a study. Sometimes you have to do a study, and in lieu of the study, you can do a waiver. Even though we did not have to do that, that's the process we went through to try to make sure that any traffic concerns were mitigated. Thank you all.
Would our city engineer come to
That'd be
Mr. Murdy?
Mark Absher's the one who did this one.
Huh?
Mark Absher's the one who did
actually
this
does
one.
traffic.
That's why he's here tonight.
Mark Absher, traffic engineer in this case, and do you have any questions?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Normally, what numbers would make you, as an engineer, say that we need a traffic study? My questions at the last meeting, I still have in my mind. I'm not an engineer, but I know that 60-some vehicles are going to be coming out or more out of this development with a right turn only on Campbell Lane and with a stoplight already in position on Small House at Campbell Lane, where we already have traffic backed up. So my question is, why didn't we count vehicles?
there's two parts to the answer on that. One is that the trip generation triggers are 500 per day and a 100 per hour peak. Either one of those can trigger a traffic impact study. With this location, with the volumes that they were talking about, the number of units, it would fall below those thresholds in both counts.
Now,
And
let me make sure I'm clear. Are we talking about counts from Nashville Road to Small House Road? Or are we talking about counts from the egress of the development to Small House?
no, we're specifically talking about the develop itself. What kind of traffic would they generate off of this site? And given the number of units we're presented with, it's going to fall below what would trigger the traffic impact study.
I guess my question mark is, and clear me up, I get confused at times,
Okay.
as you know. What is the count on Campbell Lane from Nashville Road to Small House Road?
I wouldn't know that information. That's a state route, and they
Mr. Plunkett's
here as well. But
You would know it either.
right, but I want to be factual in any kind of thing I say, so I would be a guess at this point to say what that would be.
Well, I'm not
It's-
trying to trick you, but
Okay.
I think all of us that has lived here as long as I have know that a lot of vehicles travel this road from Nashville Road to Small House Road. And when those yellow buses start running and mom and pop and grandparents are at the junior high, like I do sometime, it gets even worse, the traffic. So those are my concerns, and it just bothers me at times that maybe we say as professional people or as engineers that we need to maybe take a look at this and see what we come up with total numbers. Even though maybe the numbers of vehicles in this particular development may be low, but even a low number going into a high volume traffic road can create problems.
And I would agree with that. That's why specifically the KYTC was brought into their part of that with the Campbell Lane interaction with the development, and they discussed that with them. For our side, with it going into the Thimblefinger and Mohawk area, we just looked purely at the numbers, at what kind of traffic would be generated by this location. And I actually did my own calculations based on the 33 that I had heard in the last presentation. It was about 245 ADT and 21 to 22 peak hours. So we're well below the thresholds that would be required. But I understand what you're saying with the interaction with a higher volume adjacent to the site.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
My questions, Mark, thank you for being here tonight. If I understand right, you said 500, it would only be triggered at 500 trips per day or 100 trips per hour.
Correct.
And you said neither one of these thresholds were met.
Correct.
How do you calculate whether or not they were met if you don't count the number of cars at the time of the request?
Well, we're dealing with development numbers. We're dealing with things that are, like in this instance, the number we're dealing with is 33 houses or townhomes. Each one of those, we have trip generation manuals, which are based off national studies where they go out and actually count hotels, houses, apartments, townhouses, things like that. How many vehicles per day leave each one of those locations? And then we can look at that trip generation manual and see kind of what kind of vehicle traffic are we talking about with a townhome. How many vehicles per day? You're not talking about just the people that go there. You're talking about families, everything else. And so those numbers are generated based off of, for in this example, we had 33, so I could just go look at the book, look at the formula for it to see what kind of trips that it's thinking it's going to generate off that site. And so it comes up about 245 in that range. And the peak hour is the same way. They've done studies to see what kind of peak hour generations for a particular development would be generated off these sites, and that's where that other number comes from. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It does to me. Do the numbers or the formulas that you're using calculate in things like, and don't misunderstand me, Mr. Harmon, you correct me if I go too far. I'm not suggesting that we should violate fair housing. I'm just suggesting that somebody who's 75 probably takes less trips a day than somebody who's 17 or 18 or 21 or 45. Do those formulas calculate in townhomes and the size of communities from the size of communities that the roads or the trips would actually occur in?
Yes,
Are they weighted in some way?
Actually, the book is, there's 2 books, and they're about 400 pages, and they take in a lot of different aspects. And in this location, it pulls in the townhomes, because that's what I understand they were looking at developing here. And there's an actual table that gives you the townhomes. In answer to your question about ages and things like that, they don't really get too involved in that, but they do have some retirement home numbers, other sources that we can look at as well. For example, in some neighborhoods, you can tell that 100 homes may not necessarily generate the same numbers in a home where there are a lot of retirement people as it would in like an active, younger community, where you have a lot of interactions and a lot of movements. And so we try to look at those, but in this instance, it was well below those threshold numbers.
Does it take into account accident data at major intersections surrounding the development?
It says if there's a significant number of crashes that we can look at that to see if there's something we can do to try to help improve the situation that way.
What would be a significant number? Does it say?
No, it doesn't say.
Because I worked with the police department. In 2017, Campbell Lane and Small House Road had 38 accidents. So that's if you came out of the development and turned right. The first major intersection would be, I'm sorry, if you turned, right, you would have 38 accidents. If you turned left, which you're not supposed to do, but you'll have 69 accidents. If you turned right and then made another right onto Small House and went down to Cave Mill, it would be 31 accidents. If you turned right and turned left onto Small House and went to Covington, the next major intersection, you would have 27 accidents. So when you talk about, and that's police department data, what would be a significant number of accidents that you would consider related to the numbers, the formulas that you're using?
I think the most important thing here is to understand too that we don't have control over KYTC intersections and their inputs on whether a study is required or not, and that's why we've asked the state to be here as well to kind of represent that part of the question. And as far as that involvement, ours would be more concerned with where Thimblefinger and Mohawk and Small House comes in and things like that. And in answer to your question, that would be something that we'd have to address.
That the state would have to address.
The
So
state.
even though that development is in the city, and the city's traffic engineer is signing off on it, so to speak, but because they're state intersections, you don't consider those numbers?
No, we would work with the state on anything that they propose in those areas, but we don't have any authority to dictate to them what is required out of development.
I understand that. I'm just asking, when do you consider the accident data? Do you only consider accident data on city streets, or do you consider accident data that would surround the development?
We would only consider the parts that we have control over, which is our right-of-way.
So that means that you would only consider accident data on city streets?
Correct.
Even though, okay.
I understand what you're talking about. That's within the city limits.
Well, what I'm asking, what I'm driving at is that you said that there's a formula and it's on trips per day. I asked you if it considered accident data, and you said it did if it was a significant number. I asked you what a significant number was, or did they define the number? You said that they didn't. I then described the 4 major intersections that are around that development and asked you if you would consider those numbers, and you said no, the state would consider those numbers. Is that accurate?
No,
Okay.
no. The accident data is separate from the trip generation manuals. It's separate from all the other things. The accident data is something we would pull in. It's in our traffic impact study requirements for triggers. If we look at that and say, well, there's a lot of crashes here, why are you putting more traffic into this little location? Is there things that we can do to solve our problems within our right-of-way? As far as state right-of-ways, that would involve the state, since we don't have any authority to dictate to them what kind of requirements they're going to have within our right-of-way. I hope that clarifies that.
So it would be that if you considered that data, you would only make recommendations.
Right.
And since they're not city-controlled roads, you wouldn't make those recommendations.
Right.
Fair enough. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's it? Okay.
Yeah, one other.
Okay.
One other, Mark. And during traffic studies, can we take a count or ask the state, with this being a state-maintained road, to give us a count? We, the city, can we not ask them to put a strip out, give us a count of traffic on Campbell Lane? Is that something that we cannot do?
You can ask them for that information. In fact, they've got a website that's active that you can pull those counts off of. And he's here present if you want to talk to him. I don't know if he would know the numbers right off the top of his head either, but he can give you more information on that. But we use those, wherever we can on whatever we're trying to decide on.
So you mean to tell me we have an apartment going in here and we can pull this off electronically and we don't know what the traffic count is at this particular point?
I don't know what the traffic count is along Campbell Lane, and we don't know what ultimately this development would generate. We're looking at numbers based off what other sites have generated. But as far as Campbell Lane, that again would go to the state.
Mark, if I may,
Yeah.
would the city of Bowling Green actually put the strip out and do the traffic count, or is that something we would request the state to do? How is that process done?
We would actually contact the state and talk to them to see, and they may have more recent counts, that are within a reasonable time frame that are already out there. We just need to find out from them. And I don't doubt that they would go out and do an actual count for us if that's what you requested.
That's what I've got in my mind.
Okay.
Our good friends at the state, we all work together. It would appear to me that any time that we had a concern about a traffic situation, that we should be able to go and say, let's put a strip out there and let's count it for 30 days and see what we come up with. We can do that, can we not, based on what Katie asked?
Yeah, you should be able to do 30 days. Normally, we do about 7 to 8 days, but 30, whatever you request, we can talk with them.
I just used that as an example.
Right.
I had no idea the number of days, but my question and my concern is that we can get a count.
Yes.
This would be a planning and zoning function, not a city commission of Bowling Green function, but I would like to see some discussion at that level to where more counts are taken before they get here to us. And I'm just one seated up here. There are 4 of us, but Joe Dennon would like to see everything that is available to me to make a decision whether it be yea or nay, pertaining to traffic. Now, if that's gonna make somebody do a few hours more work, so be it. We're the one that takes the heat, whether the answer is yea or nay. And I would like to see whatever is available out there to help me, regardless of whether it's Campbell Lane, Joe Denning Lane, helps me to make a better decision about that particular application. And I'm not raising hell with you, Mark. You know that.
I understand that.
Well, do we,
I was going to ask to speak with Mr. Plunk from the state.
okay, that's fine, me, as long as.
Thank you, Mark.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm Joe Plonk. I'm the District Engineer for the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet's Bowling Green office. We cover 10 counties, but also Bowling Green and Warren County. I do want to make sure everyone in the room knows that my presence tonight is not to advocate for or against a development. That's not my responsibility. My responsibility is the access of any development to a state-maintained route, in this case, Campbell Lane. So that's why I've made myself available if you have any questions.
Glad to see you.
Good to see you.
Mr. Absher said that it's 500 per day, 100 per hour for the city. What is it for the state?
It is the same. We use, the city and state work together. We utilize the same guidance manual that he was referring to. Our policy is based on that same manual. So there are thresholds that have to be met, and for us, that is 140 dwelling units before it triggers a traffic impact study.
So that is different than the cities then, because unless Mr. Absher comes up and tells me I'm wrong, he didn't mention anything about dwellings. He just mentioned trips per day.
The dwelling units, the studies show that number of dwelling units will generate the 100 vehicles per hour in the peak hour.
So 140 dwellings would generate 100 trips per day, or 100 trips per hour in the peak hour is what you're saying?
Yes.
So maybe we're saying the same thing, but so do you go by the number of dwellings or do you go by the number of trips? So if there's a website that tells us the number of trips, going back to Commissioner Denning's question, do you know the number of trips that occur between Campbell Lane and Nashville Road and Campbell Lane and Smallhouse Road?
We do traffic counts, so I wanted to address that. We do traffic counts every 3 years on segments of roadway, so I could tell you what the volume of traffic is on Campbell Lane. I don't have that memorized, unfortunately. I didn't bring that number with me. It's somewhere in the 20,000 to 25,000 vehicles per day. But Smallhouse Road and Campbell Lane is not even in our top 10 as far as crash history in Warren County. So earlier when it was mentioned about 38 crashes sounds like a big number, but 38 crashes when there are 25,000 vehicles per day funneling through is well below average for an urban intersection. But ultimately, my point I'm trying to make is, yes, we do have traffic data on that segment of roadway. Do we know the number of vehicles that pass in front of that driveway? No, that count may have been done a quarter mile up the road, but it's generally very close. And that's only going to give us a daily traffic count. It's not an hourly count.
And do you know when that count was last taken? Was that taken last year, 16, 15, 14? If you say it's taken every 3 years, do we know?
It's online. I can find that out for you. I don't have that with me.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So help me understand, and I know Mr. Davenport before suggested that I may know the answers to questions before I ask them, and he's absolutely right. I feel like my responsibility as a representative is to ask questions that the public wants answers to and get those answers in a public meeting. You mentioned that 25,000 trips per day, that you rough estimate between Nashville Road, and Small House. Is that accurate?
It's in that ballpark, yes.
So help me and the public understand how out of 25,000 counts on that road, you don't come up with 500 trips per day or 100 trips per hour.
Again, it's just based on the development. So if you came to me as a private property owner and you wanted to build a single-family residence and put in a driveway that serves just your house, we're going to look at that and say you're generating a couple of trips a day. I'm not going to make you do a traffic impact study because of that. So that our policy is based on the size of the development. And in this case, given that there are, 32 units, some of those probably have multiple bedrooms, but still well below the 140 dwelling units, then it just, for us, did not trigger a traffic impact study. However, we do, when planning and zoning brings us all to the table to discuss these items during the planning process, we talk about things that we can do to improve, to mitigate the traffic and operational issues that may exist at that access point. So that's how the right-in, right-out access only was included in the binding element.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that when you consider traffic counts, you only consider the traffic counts that are coming out of the development. And so you're not considering the existing traffic that is on Campbell Lane.
Generally, yes, that's correct, yes.
So how do you then determine whether or not Campbell Lane can handle the additional traffic if you don't consider both the traffic that's on there and the new traffic that would be coming out?
Again, by policy, my responsibility is how developments or any property accesses the highway, and every entrance contributes something to that traffic count, but by policy, I'm required to go by those thresholds. Because this was well below that threshold of 140 dwelling units, we did not require the traffic impact study. I mean, you could make the case that developments that occur well down Cave Mill or Small House or, out in the far reaches of the county also impact Campbell Lane. As Warren County grows, Campbell Lane is impacted by that. So you can't just look at one property on that highway and consider that it's generating all the problems.
I'm not suggesting it's generating all the problems, but wouldn't all that data already be collected in the number of trips per day that you told us about the website, that all the people that are coming in and out of the county, wouldn't that already be collected in that essentially?
It's only counting the number of vehicles that pass over that tube that we set out once every 3 years at any given point. It's not looking at turning movement count. So you can have, look, I-65 has 60,000 vehicles per day, but nobody can turn left or right on it. So it flows pretty efficiently, I think. Campbell Lane and other roadways have driveways every 50 feet. And so a lower traffic volume could create more of an impact. So it's not just about the traffic number itself, which is why we look at the individual development and what traffic is being generated by that access point.
I don't have any other questions for Mr. Plunk. Do you, Joe?
It appears over the years that our citizens seem to have a lot of faith in their minds when there is a traffic count. Whether in their minds it meets the standards of what our books say rather than an actual or physical count when it comes to us here. At Planning and Zoning, I think they explain the same thing that has been explained to us, and it has in depth here tonight. Anytime that you have more than a duplex, people get concerned. when you talk of 40, 50 units, X number of vehicles, people get concerned. And to just suggest that because apartments are being built somewhere, I don't know, and I've never heard of statistical information that says automatically that property goes down. In some places, there are a lot of real nice apartments and condos that do not make property go down. So just, I don't like a stigma attached to apartments because everybody has to live somewhere. Whether it's in an apartment, castle, or a mansion, or a single-family residence. And to attach a stigma that is negative to apartments, I think is wrong. Our decisions as to why we don't want them there should be based on factual information rather than it being John and Jane Doe in an apartment that is close to me.
I look at this map correctly, it's 33,300 trips between Nashville Road and Smallhouse Road on Campbell Lane.
Okay.
If I understand, though, correctly, you don't really consider that number. You just consider the number coming out of the proposed development.
That's correct, yes.
And that's the only way it generates a traffic study, not whether or not Campbell Lane can hold the additional traffic. It's just counting the vehicles coming out.
That's correct, yes. I'm going to make the assumption that given that it's less than 100 vehicles per hour, the assumption is that it's not going to have a major or significant impact on the traffic on Campbell Lane. Now, if someone was proposing a large box store retail, then of course it's going to meet the traffic impact study, and the traffic impact study may make recommendations of a signal or turn lanes or other sorts of improvements. But given the size of the development, it did not meet that threshold, and that's for a purpose.
And I asked Mr. Absher about the accident data. Do you consider the accident data in that?
There is engineering judgment that goes into making decisions about access, and that's really what led to the right in, right out. To us, to our office, having an entrance within, within the functional area of the signal, and allowing individuals to make left turns is not the safest, most efficient way to travel through there. So that's what led to the right in, right out access. So in a sense, yes, the crash history does play a role in making decisions on what the access will look like.
Questions for Mr.
Thank you.
One question that I have for you, Mayor, is when Mr. Schy was up here, he was talking about the tax rolls that were presented by Mr. Davenport during his closing arguments. And you said that we don't consider that. If we're considering the record, which includes the videotape that I've watched numerous times, where I heard Mr. Davenport talk about the tax rolls, how do I then not consider that?
Well, it's similar to a judicial situation when evidence is presented in court and the judge gives you instructions that you can only consider certain things. It would be incumbent on you to disregard that information when you come to your conclusion. And that doesn't mean they disqualify the entire jury every time a lawyer tries to sneak something in, to try to do something along that line. It's just your own personal integrity to remove that data from your consideration.
And who's telling me to disqualify it?
Mr. Harmon has indicated that, as I understand from our last meeting, that was inappropriate to consider based on, well, he and Mr. Moore both, based on federal law.
Is that accurate, Mr. Harmon?
I want to make sure I get the question here. As I was reading, trying to figure out what was said at the hearing.
What I heard last time is what we should not consider is things that violate the fair labor, or the, not
Fair housing.
Fair housing standard. And what Mr. Davenport presented in his closing argument that had no rebuttal to it was information concerning how much was rental or how much was homeowner based upon tax records. Is that something that we should disqualify?
Maybe we need to have him come up and speak. So I was trying to read a minute ago exactly where he presented that. I can't remember if he presented in his closing, and maybe if his closing comments. If that's closing comments, that was really not testimony. That was just his closing. That's what I was trying to read a minute ago, where he made that comment. But the issues last time, as Mr. Moore pointed out, the issues doing fair housing, a fine line when you start to do rezoning approvals, when you start looking at making a decision on rezonings involving multifamily housing, is what you basing it on. It is based on the fact that you got to be really careful crossing that fine line. Are you based on the people who live in those, or the perceptions? As Commissioner Denning said, talking about a few minutes ago, it would be improper to start making decisions on rezonings involving multifamily housing based upon the fact of the fears of the type of people who might live there. That's when you start crossing fair housing issues. I'm not sure there's a fair housing issue with his closing comments. And again, Chris may need to update me, because I was trying to read a minute ago where he made those comments. But my understanding is, I think he kind of made those comments in his closing and closing arguments. You know, as in a court of law, closing arguments aren't testimony. They're just, and I'm not too sure. You know, we have no idea what the Planning Commission based their decision on and what they didn't. But I'm not too sure. You know, at that point, they were already closed. The discussion was over. The testimony is over. In his closing arguments, he kind of rebutted some of the testimony they put forward. And like that, again, that's the record we've got before us now.
Mr. Davenport?
I don't know exactly what the commission wants to hear about that. The record indicates how that information came in. The only thing that I would, I guess, add to that is, and that information was presented, as Mr. Moore discussed at the last hearing, after some neighbors got up in opposition and talked about renters, and talked about we don't want renters, and talked about crime statistics of renters, and that kind of nonsense, Commissioner Denning, as you've pointed out today. And at that hearing, when I presented that, the first comment I made was, I wish I didn't feel the need to do this, because, as I said in your last meeting, that information by opposition or by homeowners or land should never come up. We shouldn't allow people at the Planning Commission to stand before a microphone and say renters are less people than homeowners. That being said, the information that was brought in response to that, Mr. Shy has mischaracterized. And I don't want to get into weeds on this, but that if you take the time to look at that exhibit, the individual lots are not colored by virtue of where the bills are sent. They're colored by virtue of the percentage of addresses on those streets that have secondary bill addresses. His lot, if you looked at the exhibit for Mohawk, says his bill goes to his house. If you actually read the exhibit, you'll see that. Mr. Shy would see that very clearly. So I don't want to hold that. Again, I let that go earlier because I think that's a nothing burger. And it's hard to sit here and have someone mischaracterize statements you've made and evidence you've presented, but when they haven't read them.
I empathize with you on that.
And so, but I did that just the same. But the point here is, I think, Mr. Harmon, the information about renters should not be considered. Shouldn't be. Absolutely under the Fair Housing Act, my opinion. And likewise, the retort to that shows that the Shawnee Estates neighborhood is largely comprised by people who rent their homes. My statement that night was, it's not a good neighborhood in spite of that fact. It's just a good neighborhood. in part because of that fact. It's so, frankly, I don't think you should consider any of that. And that exhibit would have never been brought up if it had not been for the people that came to that planning commission and belittled and slandered and defamed people who rent their homes. So my response is, Commissioner Nash, throw it all out. I wouldn't pay attention to any of it if I were you.
The tricky part there is, though, Mr. Davenport, is in one hand you can say that crime, you shouldn't say, but if we make the argument that you're saying that some of the residents made, is that crime occurred because of the type of people who live in apartments, which I reject, wholeheartedly reject. But there is value to saying that the density of the number of homes that occupy a square piece of property is potentially going to have more crime because you have more people. And that is something to consider, correct?
That's not the argument that was made or to my knowledge has ever been made. The argument that was made is that renters make X number a year based upon who knows what that gentleman got that. And homeowners make X number of years. And the police get called to renters X number of times a year and they get called to homeowners X. It had nothing to do with density. And it wasn't just one. There were a few thinly veiled comments like that. You all have seen these hearings in the past.
Yes.
You can sniff it out. You can tell it before it even comes to a head. You know where that's going. Right. And I've urged many times the Planning Commission, I wish that stuff would just be stopped. Because not only is it contrary to federal law, frankly, it's distasteful for all those involved.
I'll move on from there. Thank you, sir. I do want to ask you one thing before you leave the podium, Mr. Davenport.
Yes, sir.
As I understood you to say earlier, and I can't watch the video of tonight's meeting while I'm in the meeting, but I heard you say earlier that the staff indicated that it met every goal and objective.
Staff said they could not state there was one policy not fulfilled.
Okay.
That was my statement. That was their statement. If you watch the hearing, you'll see a back and forth between Ben and I that there were a handful of mays. And what Mr. Peterson conceded is those will always be mays. That the staff will never be able to opine that those policies are fulfilled. So put it another way, and again, my statement was they couldn't find one policy that they would say was not fulfilled. And in fact, I'll say it a different way. Every policy that they could opine, yay or nay, was a yay. There are some policies, as Ben said, they'll just never be able to give an up or down on. We'll expect to always find those in both categories, if you follow my reasoning there.
And for those that may not understand, Mr. Davenport is saying he's using the word may as the proposed development may be appropriate,
Correct.
given the future land use map and categories. The Planning Commission should determine if the proposal is compatible with the area and meets the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. The proposal complies with the majority of the criteria assessed in the review process.
For instance, one of those mays was whether the design elements are satisfactory enough to comport to the area, the design elements. And again, this is a development with 50% green space and 80% brick. 80% brick. And the staff said, basically, that's always going to be a may. They're not going to say that 80% brick is nice enough. Now, I don't know how many developments I've done with more than 80% brick. I don't know if I've done any that I've been involved in. 80% brick is about as high as it gets. So that was an example of one where Mr. Peterson said, don't ever expect Mr. Davenport to have that as a definite yes or no. That's always going to be a maybe. Of the dozen or so that they could put in one or the other, they all went in yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Peterson.
Sir.
One question.
Okay.
I don't mean it as a loaded question. You've heard a lot of people talk about information that you shared. Is there anything that you disagree with?
Disagree with, I would just like to maybe clarify a little bit about what the staff report is and isn't. So as you may be aware, others may not know, that the staff does not make recommendations. And that is true for every single element that is listed in that staff report, every single one of those items. We do not make a recommendation on.
That has not always been the case, though, correct?
It has been since he's been
It
here.
Right, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah. So last time, it's my understanding, it was sometime in the 2006, 2008 time frame that staff quit making recommendations to the Planning Commission and the other decision makers such as yourself.
Nothing else? All right. I don't have any other questions. I still believe that there is a lot of confusion that surrounds the process, and I believe that one way that we can try to address the confusion is to have a new hearing. I realize that most planning and zoning issues that come before this body are easily decided. We're going to have one on later. We'll have many of them on at our next meeting and future meetings, but there are some that deserve to ensure that everybody has been heard and everybody walks away not feeling like they won, because everybody can't win in a dispute, but everybody walks away feeling like they had a fair shot at presenting their argument. For a number of different reasons here, I believe that there are people that are not only going to walk away upset with the outcome, but they're going to walk away upset that they don't feel like they got a fair shot. We do have 3 levels of decision-making. The city commission is not just supposed to say, well, planning and zoning passed it, so we pass it too. Many of the decisions we make are that easy, but some of them are not. And so I renew my motion to have a new hearing.
Mayor, I concur with the fact that I believe there is a need for a hearing. It has nothing to do with Commissioner Nash's decision. This is Joe Denning's decision inside. Regardless of how I may vote, after that, I do feel that we need to have a hearing. I believe from this hearing, all of us can come away with a better benchmark of our role in the different steps of this process. That is my feeling.
Do you second the motion?
Yes, I second the motion. I didn't know everybody was waiting on me. I'm sorry.
I don't know if everybody was, but I was.
Well,
Motion's been made to,
just one other thing. I know that people that look at this transmission from the city commission, and maybe even some that may be present, think that the 5 of us up here talk about or discuss how we're going to vote. I have not had a conversation with any of the 4 here about how I'm going to vote. Joe Denny is going to vote the way he has the past 24 years and for what I think in my mind. And the others will vote how they think. That's the reason there's 5 of us up here. So don't go away thinking that I have had a discussion with Slim Nash, hadn't seen Slim until tonight, and hadn't talked to him until, hi Slim, now. Thank you, Your Honor.
Motion's been made to have an entirely new hearing on the issue of we would, if we have a new hearing, then we would have to
Have to
table
table
this
second
one.
reading. I think the motion again would be you table second reading if it is approved for a new hearing.
Told me that last time. I'm
Yes.
sorry. I amend my motion to table. You second.
Second.
So the motion is to table ordinance, the second reading ordinance BG 2018, number 10. So yes vote is to table, and then we'll move on to a new hearing at some later date.
Clarification, is it motion to table for a new hearing? Just to?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Just clarify.
Yes
Any
is for,
questions?
and the no is against the table.
Call the roll.
Perigin.
No.
Williams.
No.
Denning.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
Motion to table has been defeated, so we will continue with the second reading of this ordinance to 2018, number 10. And it's time for, we've had public discussions, time for a commission if they have any comments.
Do what now?
Do you have any more comments?
Go back to what you.
We're going to go on and vote on it tonight. The motion to table failed, so we're going to go ahead and vote on it tonight. There won't be a new hearing. So now, is there any other discussion based on this information?
Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to say I've done a lot of research on this. I've listened to all the arguments. I've watched the tapes, the recordings. I have friends and acquaintances on both sides of this issue. And I can't please all of you. But I can find no legal reason to overturn the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And that's why I'll vote the way I vote.
I'm going to agree with my colleague Rick. These are the most difficult, challenging things that we have to decide up here. And none of it is ever taken lightly, ever. It's extremely important. A community with growth has challenges, better challenges, I would argue, than a community without growth. But these decisions are extremely difficult, and they're very emotional. Folks have been very emotional and very forward with the fact that I attended a chamber event, which I go to every chamber event that I can go to, 95% of them, because I'm a chamber ambassador. Just that I happened to be at a certain event, and I happened to thank somebody for hosting that event. You know, it's hard. It's not pleasant. It's not pretty for people to maybe assume that you have some motivation that you know you don't. But I think the most important thing when it comes to planning and zoning is that we're consistent, that we have a consistent approach to managing our growth here in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And, you know, a 7-1 vote without any indication of anything that was inappropriate or wrong, or it would be really difficult to not go along with your commission that we put in place to do this work, to really avoid a lot of this type of confusion, I would say. So that's what I have to say, and Rick's right. This is a difficult job, and you can't please everybody. You just can't. I have friends that live in Shawnee Estates. I have friends that live on Small House Road, and the same way I had friends that lived out Old Scottsville Road, and you know, I was for that also. So, thank you all.
For those in the audience that understand that somebody has to manage the meeting, and that's me. It seems like I'm the bad guy sometimes because I try to follow the rules, and sometimes the rules are more stringent than perhaps the public would like, or they'd like to add other additional evidence to it. So I apologize that you're not able to add anything else under law, I have to follow certain things, and I interrupted a couple of you, and I apologize for that, because I want to make sure I knew that I was trying to keep the record straight. So, anything else? Please call the roll.
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Denning.
No.
Nash.
No.
Wilkerson.
Yes. The ordinance passes. And we'll wait just a moment and give you an opportunity to leave the meeting if you choose to.
Jeez.
I understand. We'll wait.
What's South Warren's logo? Warren High School. What's
Spartan. Take a few minutes break.
Taking a brief recess? All right.
Okay, we return after our brief recess for the second reading of ordinance BG 2018, number 11.
Ordinance relating to budget amendment. Ordinance approving budget amendment number 2 to the City of Bowling Green, Kentucky annual operating budget for fiscal year 2018.
Second. Motion by Perigin, second by Nash. This is second reading for information that was presented at the last time. Is there any further comments or discussion? Please call the roll.
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Denning.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
Yes. Second reading of ordinance BG 2018, number 12.
Ordinance annexing property by consent. Ordinance annexing 143.28 acres of property located at 113 and 435 Brookwood Drive, 4701 and 4859 Morgantown Road, and 453 Rigglewood Lane, with property owned by Jerry E. Baker by and through the estate of Jerry E. Baker, the Jerry E. Baker Foundation Incorporated, Texas Gas Transmission LLC, and the City of Bowling Green, and 3.26 acres of right-of-way for a total of 146.54 acres, with said territory being contiguous to existing city limits.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Perigin, second by Williams. Again, this is second reading of the presentation from the last time, basically bringing the Baker Foundation property into the city limits, and we thank them for their interest. Any other comments or questions? Please call the roll.
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Denning.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
Yes. Municipal Order 2018-31.
Municipal order approving the promotion of Kimberly S. Ives to the position of Administrative Assistant in the Human Resources and Risk Management Department.
So moved.
Moved. Second.
Motion by Denning, second by,
I'd like to have Human Resources and Risk Management Director Mike Grubbs to come forward and explain some proposed reorganization for the department following a recent resignation, and then to present the individual recommended for promotion.
Grubbs.
Good evening. I'd like to take the opportunity to recommend for promotion Kim Ives. She's worked in our department since 2011. We had the Human Resources Specialist position came vacant at the beginning of the year. Department staff got together and discussed the vacancy and decided that we'd like to recommend a reorganization and actually fill the position as administrative assistant, which is 2 grades lower than the vacant position. We had an administrative assistant position in the past, but it got reorganized during the recession in 2012, 2011. Kim has worked for us since 2011. She's been a full-time office associate since 2012 and achieved senior office associate status this past year. In doing the reorganization, we'll move some job duties around and then hopefully refill her position as an office associate. She is here this evening along with her husband, Joe, and her son, Steph Curry Jr. Kim?
Congratulations, Kim. We're happy for you.
Look at Mike with the pop culture. Look at you, man.
Second to remember.
Kim, I love seeing how
Might be
excited.
LeBron.
Kim, I love seeing how excited your son is. He is just beaming.
I had a conversation with him there a while ago, Commissioner, and kind of filled him in on some things around here. We're going to be all right, aren't we?
She still wants the job, huh? Okay. Congratulations. We need to vote on it, though. Please call the roll.
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Denning.
That's a yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
Yes. Congratulations. I know we've held you here a long time. You're welcome to slip out if you like. Municipal order approving Municipal Order 2018-32.
Municipal order approving the probationary appointment of Mitchell L. Saltzman to the position of Parks Facility Maintainer in the Parks and Recreation Department.
Moved.
Second.
Perigin, Ms. Ward, get it right.
We had a recent resignation which allowed this position to become available. But just about a month ago, we had just completed some interviews and hired for a similar position for Parks Maintenance Senior. So we used that same interview pool to come up with the candidate, Mr. Saltzman, who's being recommended to fill this position. Mr. Saltzman is here tonight, and he's standing in the back of the room.
Congratulations, Mitchell. We appreciate your work. All right, any comments or questions? I'm sure he appreciates not getting through the same drilling that Kim has, so please call the roll.
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams?
Yes.
Denning?
Yes.
Nash?
Yes.
Wilkerson?
Municipal Order 2018-33.
Municipal order approving the reappointment of Jeffrey Stein and appointment of John Ward to the Bowling Green Audit Committee.
So moved.
Second.
Perigin, second by Williams. And the Audit Committee, Commissioner Denning serves on, and that's a group of people, along with one commissioner, who examines information presented to them by our internal auditor to try to make sure that we're on track with how to do things correctly and keep track of your money. And I appreciate Mr. Stein's willingness to be reappointed, and the other John Ward, who's willing to accept this position. Are there any comments or questions?
No relation to me.
No relation. Please call the roll.
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Denning.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
Yes. Municipal Order 2018-34.
Municipal order authorizing and accepting bid number 2018-03 for Warren Way sidewalk construction from Scott Murphy Incorporated of Bowling Green, Kentucky in the amount of $486,320.95.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Perigin, second by Nash. Ms. Ward.
This project is part of our ongoing new sidewalk construction program. It's going to build approximately 1,931 linear feet of 5-foot sidewalk, including ADA compliant ramp, and then make some other improvements, including curb and gutter. This is going to be located on Warren Way between Durbin Drive to College View Drive. This was vetted, I believe, to the Board of Commissioners previously as one of our projects. It's gone through the process. We're now ready to start construction. There were 4 bids received, and Scott and Murphy is recommended to receive the bid based on lowest price. And Mr. Meredith, our Public Works Director, is here if you have any questions or would like any additional information about this particular project.
Questions or comments? Please call the roll.
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Denning.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
Yes. Municipal Order 2018-35.
Municipal order authorizing and accepting bid number 2018-06 for Robin Road drainage improvements from Knight Electric Incorporated of Russellville, Kentucky in the amount of $223,211.75.
Moved.
Second by Denning.
This is, again, another project that we have for the city. That's our ongoing project for stormwater mitigation program. And it addresses some drainage improvements along Robin Road. We received 6 bids, and Knight Electric is recommended to receive the bid award based on lowest price. You might say, Knight Electric, what do they have to do with, drainage improvement construction? We actually looked into this company, did some vetting of our own. We have confirmed they have completed projects that are similar to this and are capable of completing our project. So we do recommend the bid award to Knight Electric. And again, Mr. Meredith is here if you have any additional questions or would like more information about this project.
Comments or questions? Call the roll.
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Denning.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
Yes. Municipal Order 2018-36.
Municipal order authorizing and accepting bid number 2018-49 for the Police Department membrane roof replacement from Clapp Roofing Company Incorporated of Mayfield, Kentucky in the amount of $68,700.
So moved.
Perigin, second by Nash.
The roof replacement was actually to be scheduled for next fiscal year. However, the deterioration of that roof has made it for us to have to replace it sooner rather than later. We have found some underspending in the budget to be able to move forward with this project now. 4 bids were received, and Clapp Roofing Company is recommended to receive this bid based on lowest cost. And again, Mr. Meredith is here if you have any questions.
Are there any comments or questions? Please call the roll.
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Denning.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
Yes. Municipal Order 2018-37.
Municipal order authorizing and accepting bid number 2018-46 for the Hobson House structural improvements from Dixie Restoration and Building Maintenance, LLC of Greensburg, Kentucky in the amount of $130,786 and further approving the Hobson House repair agreement for reimbursement of repair costs in the total amount of $50,000.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Perigin, second by Williams. Ms. Ward.
We had an assessment of the structural condition of the Hobson House completed last summer based on the fact that there were some concerns on the interior and exterior cracking and settlement that was being very visible in the facility. So we did hire a professional qualified structural engineer firm, And that engineering firm provided several recommendations to help with remediation of this particular project. And so what we're doing now is recommending the actual repair to take place. We had $100,000 in the budget. We've also secured $50,000 from the Hobson House Association to contribute toward the cost. And so we had 2 bids received. Dixie Restoration and Building Maintenance is recommended to receive this bid based on lowest cost. And then the approval of the Hobson House repair agreement is also recommended to provide for the reimbursement of the $50,000 toward the repair costs. And if you have any additional questions, would like more information, Greg Meredith is here to answer those.
Comments or questions? Call the roll.
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Denning.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
Yes. Municipal Order 2018-38.
Municipal order waiving fees related to the use of Circus Square Park by Sky Science Festival Incorporated for the Sky Science Festival's Expo Day on April 28, 2018.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Perigin, second by Williams. Ms. Ward.
I believe this is the 3rd year for this particular event, and it does include a request from the event organizers to waive the fee for the use of Circus Square Park, and I believe we did approve that last year. I don't believe that the director of the Sky Science Festival, the chairman, I'm sorry, Richard Gelderman, I don't believe he's here tonight, but Brent Belcher can answer some questions if you have any.
Comments or questions?
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Denning.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
Yes. Municipal Order 2018-39.
Municipal order authorizing the Housing Authority of Bowling Green to retain the city's portion of the payment in lieu of taxes for the 2017 tax year in the total amount of $23,257.68.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Perigin, second by Denning. Ms. Ward.
Since the early 1960s, the city has had an agreement with the Housing Authority to make payment in lieu of property taxes, and there's a formula set out in that agreement as to how that amount is derived. Since 1996, the city has agreed to allow the Housing Authority to retain those funds to use toward their after-school programming, and I believe this cost is used toward the wages and benefits for the teachers or assistants that participate in that program. I believe Mr.
Williams, you sat
Williams
here a
is
long
here.
time. Do you have
Yeah.
something to add to it?
Well, say something.
We don't want to hear from you.
I didn't want to say that out loud, Joe. I wanted to be polite.
Talk all night.
What they do with the after-school program is they have computer labs, they have teaching, they have field trips. They do a lot for the children in that community to try to keep them occupied and focused on their schoolwork and advancing their, their schoolwork. So we appreciate that, and hopefully it continues to show great progress. Thank you. How many kids are in there this time? 90-some?
Overall,
200. 120 in the summertime and over 200 during the school year. Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Thank you, Mr. Williams, for what you do, for what the Housing Authority does. Sometimes it's, for some people, it's easier to do nothing and complain about the problem. I appreciate you and those that you work with deciding to do something about the problem and keep people actively engaged in positive activities.
Oh, because of his staff, Slim.
I said
Has
that.
a great, did you say great staff?
I said his colleagues.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that
I
part.
didn't give him too much credit.
Please call the roll.
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams. Denning.
Yep.
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
Yes. Municipal Order 2018, number 40.
Municipal order approving and ratifying actions of the Neighborhood and Community Services Department to accept award of 5 Veterans Affairs supportive housing vouchers for the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program.
So moved.
Second.
Perigin, second by Williams. Ms. Ward.
I'm going to ask Neighborhood and Services Coordinator Brent Childers to come forth and explain this about the additional vouchers that we're receiving.
Childers.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. This is actually the first time I have stood before you all to say we are increasing our amount of vouchers. We've been trying to do this for a number of years, but as you could imagine, HUD constantly has its challenges in dealing with some of the problems that they have to deal with in D.C. But we've been able to secure 5 vouchers that are specifically for veterans. And so what this is a partnership between us and the VA, and this is a large program that HUD has administered over the last several years. part of thousands and thousands of vouchers across the country. We're just getting 5 of them. We've been working with the VA to provide the oversight and administration of vouchers for these already, but these are now going to be ours. But the partnership comes through that the VA is providing the case management supportive services down to driving the homeless veteran to the appointments to make sure that everything's done and finding the housing for them. So we were happy to receive these, so we'll be moving forward. Also in there, there was a due date of February 28th, so I did have to sign and submit some things in there, but still wanted to bring it to you all for approval and make you aware of the growth that we're having in the housing program. Now, I'll entertain any questions or concerns.
I'll answer your question. Clerk, please call the roll.
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Denning.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
Yes. First reading of ordinance BG 2018-13.
Ordinance rezoning real estate. Ordinance rezoning a tract of land containing 1.7048 acres from AG Agriculture to RM3 multifamily residential located at 113 Middlebridge Stub Road, presently owned by J&T Property Management Incorporated.
So moved.
Second.
Perigin, second. Williams. First reading of a planning and zoning recommendation with a unanimous vote. Are there any comments or questions? Please call the roll.
Perigin.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Denning.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Wilkerson.
Yes. Resolution 2018, number 1.
Resolution condemning bigotry, hate speech, and hate crimes in the city of Bowling Green.
So moved.
Second.
I will allow Mr. Nash to make his presentation. I think you're going to invite some people to speak too.
Yes. First, before I say anything, I'd like to invite Mr. Grambling to the microphone if he so chooses to come. Mr. Grambling spoke before the City Commission at our last meeting asking for a resolution condemning hate in the community of Bowling Green. We have had some issues related to hate that the police department has effectively and adequately investigated and pursues. The mayor made some comments when that particular incident occurred, but I thought it important, as Mr. Grambling did, that as a commission we make a united stand against hate. I've spent a lot of hours thinking about what to say tonight and trying to come up with the right words. Rather than trying to recreate the wheel, I would like to, I have taken the words of others and I've tried to combine them into one cohesive thought, and if you will give me a minute, I would like to read those to you. Tonight we have gathered under this roof as men and women of all races, creeds, and colors. Some of us were born in the United States, our immigration status having been resolved several generations ago. Some of us came here more recently in search of a better life. We may speak different languages. We may read from different books of Scripture. We may call our God by different names or not at all. But we all love this country. We all love this community and the ideals for which it stands. We all want our children to lead lives of safety and opportunity. We all proudly claim the title of American and citizen of Bowling Green, or maybe even the title of Purple, Dragon, Gator, Spartan, or Raider. And we all hold, as Justice Brandeis proclaimed, the most important political office, that of private citizen. Tonight, despite the contentious nature of some of the decisions made tonight in this very room, I see a living expression of the American promise, the conviction that every person's dignity is inherent and equal. That promise is as old as the nation itself. Our forefathers boldly proclaimed that all men are created equal. But of course, when those words were written, a large gap existed between America's founding ideals and America's founding reality. The very hand that put those words to paper had also signed the deeds for the sale and purchase of other human beings. For many of our ancestors, for women, African Americans, Native Americans, LGBTQ individuals, immigrants, and countless others, the promise of American life rang hollow. But the Declaration's revolutionary statement of equality was too plain and powerful, too self-evident, as Jefferson said, for the state of affairs to endure. Generation after generation of America has heard the promise set forth in the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution, and they demanded that it be fulfilled. Women who endured ridicule and condescension for seeking the ballot. Black soldiers who defended freedom overseas only to return home to a nation that wouldn't let them vote and that sometimes repaid their dedicated service with angry violence. Marchers who braved the jaws of police dogs at Birmingham and the sting of cattle prods at Selma. LGBTQ individuals who fought for their civil rights at the Stonewall Inn. Through the courage and determination of these and countless others who have gone before us, we have slowly built a society that more reflects our founding creed of liberty and justice for all. My hope that those brave people and the others that, and many others have shown is still alive in the country and alive in Bowling Green. You and I know what the Declaration means when it says all men are created equal. You and I also know that doesn't just mean men. You and I know what the Constitution means when it says we the people. So let us leave here tonight united in our confidence, inspired by our faith, and strengthened by our courage. Let us leave Bowling Green City Hall with a renewed commitment and demanding nothing less than a country and a community that is true to America's promises. Let us leave here in hope, the hope that has brought the United States so far in the last 240 years, the hope that I'm confident will carry us even further in the days to come. Will this be hard work? It has always been hard work. Will there be challenges ahead? We have always known that the price of freedom is constant vigilance. Will we persevere? We always do. There is no sense in asking that a mountain be moved because we know that that is not possible. Instead, I'm asking each of you to join me in summoning the strength to climb the mountain. Let me assure you that I recognize that this resolution that we're doing tonight is only words on paper. But we can make it more. We can make it more if all of you join with me in standing tonight, tomorrow, and every day for the cause of liberty and justice for all. Tonight, I stand against hate. He's not going to speak. Okay.
What we intended to do here was to do our roll call vote by standing, and you'll see that Mr. Nash has stood in support of the resolution against hate, as has Commissioner Denning and Commissioners William and Perigin and me. And as I talked with Mr. Nash before, I'd invite you to stand if you choose to also support this resolution against hate. And I would like for everybody to turn around and look and see that every person in this room is standing up against hate. Thank you. You're welcome to be seated, and I want the record to reflect that not only did the resolution pass unanimous with the commission's vote, but also with every member of the room. And but I told Slim I was going to preach a little bit tonight.
He did tell me that.
And I too thought long and hard about what to say because, you know, hate is an awful thing, and, you know, my remarks in the paper were pretty oxymoronic. You know, the only hate we allow here is hating hate, which doesn't make sense. But it isn't really a problem of public support. You know, no one in this room is for hate. We all oppose the degradation of a person through speech or actions. But you know, I don't want to diminish what we've done here, but I personally feel empty with a response like this. I feel like I'm just patting somebody on the head and saying it'll be okay, and it won't without actions. And I know you want to do something, we all do, but the real problem here isn't public support against or condemning hate, but the real problem is an empty heart. And what I want to refer you to is Chuck Glass, who I spoke with before I made these comments tonight. He knows I was going to bring up his example because he's the father of one of the daughters who was identified where the feces was spread on the wall of the apartment complex. And, you know, he could have had the reaction that would be typical of anyone, including me, just to be filled with rage and anger about somebody who would treat anyone, especially their own daughter, in that manner. He could have retaliated or marched, protested, but he chose to do the very thing that showed the character of his actions. He chose to post on his site that he recognized the empty heart in this individual and indicated that he was asking people to pray for him. And I think he got his example from Jesus in Matthew 5, where he said, "You've heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." And it goes on to say, "For if you love only those who love you, what reward is there?" So when you come to realization that the empty place in your heart is not, you can't fill it with your ego, which builds yourself up and demeans others, but only when you recognize what Jesus Christ did, because he loved you, and he'll fill that empty spot in your heart by taking away the sins that you and I have committed. And he took those penalties on himself up to the point that he suffered that penalty of death. And I want you to realize that he did it for each of us, and including if you were the only person left in the world, Jesus would still have died on the cross for you. He loved you that much. And that's the message that I want to leave with those who have an empty heart. Because, again, we can all get together and we can all agree, but we're preaching to the choir here. It's the person who has that hate in his heart that we need to reach. And I would encourage you to do that. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to preach. Are there any other comments?
And
Okay, that's the last item on our agenda, with exception for the public discussion. We did. We stood.
Got it.
That was our...
Very well. Understand.
Have our public discussion. Miss Donna, come get your thrashing.
If we could, just a second, I'd like for Brent Childers to come forward and kind of preamble this particular discussion. Our NCS department obviously oversees our transit program with the funding source, and so, Mr. Childers, go ahead.
So as Ms. Interim City Manager Katie Scheller Ward, I'll get all those titles correct one of these days, alluded to, Nick and I oversee kind of the transit funding as it flows through, with Community Action, Go BG Transit being the provider of transit services here in Bowling Green. And as the community changes, as the community grows, as things come online and things move around in our community, the demand for transit has to change along with that. And so I think you were all sent a letter back at the end of January, kind of overviewing some of the changes. We've received it as well, and went and sat down and met with the staff at Community Action to kind of go through what the process was, and then wanted to bring that forward to you all, and instead of just having a letter to describe it, and let them kind of describe of, what some of those changes are, what some of the dynamics that have went on in their community, what are some of the things that they've seen and how they're trying to react to provide transit services to as much of the community as we can. It's like many other public services we have, the demand is greater than the resource. And that's one of the challenges that we always have in a lot of the things that we do. So how do we best manage that? So with that, I will turn it over to Donna with Go BG Transit.
Thank you for coming, Ms. Tula. We appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting us. We appreciate the opportunity to illuminate some on this subject. I don't know if you would like to start with your questions.
But tell me first of all, you've given us two maps.
Yes.
And
the one that says Go BG Transit at the top is the new route system that went in effect March 1st.
This is
And
the old stuff.
the other is the one that was effective March 17 to March 2018. I would like to invite Camille Zapata. She is office supervisor and my right-hand person.
The bold markings are the new one. Even drew us a picture and we still get confused on it.
So one is from the map from 2017, and one map is the new 2018.
Yes, sir, the one
Very
that
well.
says Go BG Transit route map. And My apologies. You don't know to ask a question when you think you know the answer. My previous experience in attending work sessions had been in a private meeting room where we were just across the table from each other, so.
Let me just start that by asking some questions in, because and anybody feel free to jump in on this. We used a transit needs assessment and route realignment study in 2016 that I want to make sure that I properly say this correctly, was an absolute disaster, right?
Sir.
It didn't work, what he said for us to
Oh,
do,
absolute
right?
disaster.
Yes, ma'am.
I said some things work in theory that don't work in practical application. I know some of the things consultants looked at was transit propensity, and that is the neighborhoods that have a very high concentration of persons per block as compared to the lesser occupied blocks. Another thing that it's very important to look at in trying to do route design is the census to determine the location of transit-dependent population, persons that through age or income, medical condition, where those neighborhoods have very few, possibly no automobile. So they do need transportation to remove the barrier between them and a more normal life of access and possibly work, shopping, medical care, education for the younger household members.
But what do you think went wrong here with it?
Sir?
What do you think went wrong? He just went to had bad data, or he just didn't know what he was doing? I'm trying to figure out, because we gave an extra $80,000 last year to add the partial route to increase, and it went the opposite way. So
right.
We're just trying to figure it out.
The main thing, I think, not enough attention was paid to connections and the length of time it would require. For example, a person who lived in the blue route or the red route, and that's the former enterprise community zones, to be able to travel from there, say out to Lover's Lane. And there's multiple examples of where a person originating in the Enterprise Community Housing Authority area then had to make 2 transfers to get all the way to Lover's Lane or further out Scottsville Road. That was a very strong disincentive to persons to use the transit, and we think that was a primary mistake. Another focus that was given in the study was looking at transit propensity areas such as the Spring Hill area, where there's high concentration of persons per block. The fallacy of that area was, even though there's a lot of apartment complexes, apparently the people already have private transportation, because a year of operating through that neighborhood resulted in minuscule counts, far less than 100 trips. So that's the primary things I've identified was the.
So what have we done to address what you think is the deficiency from the professional study to what we did ourselves?
Okay. We didn't change everything, but one major change we did to solve the double transfer issue as much as possible is that routes 1 through 4 now all meet once an hour on Center Street, there on the curb by the Justice Center, so that it's very easy for persons to transfer between those routes. So if they live in the Enterprise Community Zone, they can be downtown in short order and transfer to go to 3 other areas of town.
Are you talking about your station, bus station over here?
Yes, sir.
And they have a place to wait inside for the transfer, is that correct?
They do,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Have you noticed an increase? This just started like how long ago?
Thursday.
Oh, okay, well, you don't know anything then.
It's a little soon to tell, but we're pretty optimistic from what we've seen.
That what your customers told you, that they hated to transfer twice?
Yes, we heard that repeatedly, and we know that we lost passengers. Another major impact was that formerly the what we called Route 5A and B, before this most recent restructuring. In Route 5B, Western Kentucky University pays the expense of operating it, and it was a 30-minute cycle, and then that was 5B. 5A also was, and so the net result was there was 15-minute frequency between the Campbell Lane, Nashville Road intersection there, all that housing that is in behind that shopping center, and on out to Regency, out Campbell Lane. Then we'd come back and we'd go up Nashville Road and serve South Campus, and a pretty straight shot to Main Campus. So we researched numbers, and we know absolutely we lost approximately 7,000 trips from losing that express and direct path of travel. And so we've reinstated it on the more colorful map with the broader lines to signify the path of travel. The purple line, you can see, goes in behind the Kroger Shopping Center, goes through it, goes out to Regency, comes back, and goes over to Russellville Road, comes up and goes into PS3, something we did try to put a focus on after conversations with Jennifer of Western Kentucky University, was between Main Campus and Sky, because the students, a number of them are enrolled on both campuses, and with parking problems on Main Campus, it's seemed to be very beneficial to have a pretty fast shuttle between Sky and the Main Campus. And that is a 30-minute frequency. I'm sorry. What was 5B is now, we're calling it Route 7, it's orange, and it's a 30-minute frequency. And so there's some double coverage in and around that shopping center and all the housing there, then with opportunities to come up through Main Campus to downtown, or to go to the Russellville Road, Morgantown Road part of town.
Been talking a lot. Anybody else have any questions?
You mentioned that you didn't have a lot of ridership out of the back section of Spring Hill, and yet I see the yellow line still runs through there.
Yes, that is left as a path of travel, and Camille worked very hard. I'm going to ask her to give us specifics on that.
The yellow route originally from previous was downtown and went out Russellville Road to Western's Parking and Transportation and back up to Western. We kind of broadened that, took it to Sky, and that's its path of travel back out. We still have the stop at Spring Hill for if there's anybody that still wants to ride. And then it actually comes all the way up Campbell Lane to the mall, Walmart, back down Campbell Lane, hits Highland, Weston over that way, and works its way back through Small House over to the bypass and back downtown.
You revert some of these routes back to what they were before you went to the small?
Part of the yellow route, yes.
And how often do we talk to the riders about what they would like to see and what, you know, what they're not getting from GoBG?
We get calls quite often. I had one today actually from a lady. They tell the drivers constantly, the drivers are always coming in. One of the reasons that we took the yellow route back on Campbell Lane is Regency Apartments. We had people that lived there that could ride downtown, catch the bus within an hour to the hospital. When it was changed and it was the purple route and there was so many connections, it was taking them over 2 hours. We had a lot of complaints with that area.
And that was to the medical center from that part of town.
Yeah.
I'm glad to know that we're listening to the riders because they're the customers. So that's the only way we're going to figure out whether or not we're meeting those needs that are out there. We can listen to these consultants that come in from out of town that think they know everything, but I think we've learned our lesson, right?
I think we have to, hey Brent, don't we have to every so often have some kind of traffic study that implies some level of professional expertise in transportation, transit? Yes or no is fine.
I think he wants to expound on that.
Ever given a yes or no?
No, that's what I was.
Okay, you brought it up. So if I think I'm understanding your question correctly, there is a planning component that goes into this. MPO is a part of that planning, is the overseer of that, most of that planning service for GoBG. But there's also their aspect of it. But then also for, I guess, a study, we do get a review every year to look at the operations and then also the financial management of the transit system through FTA, through an FTA lens. So if that didn't answer your question, then the answer is yes or no. Thank you.
Didn't mention that we got a nearly perfect on our first triennial federal review.
I do have a couple questions. I assume that every mile that the GoBG travels costs money. And so if we can efficiently reduce those number of miles, then we would have more money to spend on other things.
That's
Okay.
a good theory.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. If, I see in multiple places where the routes are overlapping. Now, I understand the need for routes to connect, so that if somebody wants to get off the yellow line and get on the purple line, that they can do so. I said yellow and purple, right? Because then, pardon? It's gold. Thank you. It's gold. It's purple and gold. But why is there the need, you know, if I just look at those two, I see that both the yellow and gold both go down what looks like Old Morgantown Road. They both go down Russellville Road. They both go down, I think that's Campbell Lane. What is the need for so much overlap and not just them connecting to one another?
I see where you're talking about as far as the yellow, but the gold doesn't go down Morgantown Road and Russellville Road. The purple line does.
Maybe he's talking about the yellow and the purple.
That's what I think, but I want to clarify that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That one.
I'm talking about the yellow and the purple routes. I guess, I see them both going down Morgantown Road. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe.
They do.
Okay.
The yellow line actually starts at our transit on 11th and Center and works its way up University and out Morgantown Road to Sky and then back up Russellville Road and loops back across.
Can I stop you there for just a minute? I don't want you to spend a lot of time answering a question. What I'm asking is, why do the number of routes, I just picked the yellow and purple as one, why do the number of routes overlap that they do? I see orange and yellow and purple that all overlap. I see pink and yellow and green that overlap. I see blue and green and red and yellow that overlap in different places. What's the necessity of them overlapping and not just connecting?
Does it provide a more frequent pickup or something?
In the downtown area, there's going to definitely be some overlap as we manage to bring 4 routes in to stop on Center Street.
Okay.
They don't necessarily approach from the same direction until they get very close to Center Street. The yellow line, one goal was to be able to offer people the opportunity to go shop on Russellville Road, or if they chose to, Nashville Road at Campbell Lane, or even to make it out to the Greenwood Mall and the Walmart out there, and then travel back and pick up the bypass where we had lost, not huge numbers, but we had lost some passengers there also, and then make it back downtown to connect with the other 3 routes. They don't travel at the same time, so it increased frequency.
That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
So it gives people more opportunities to catch a bus at some stop, even though they're overlapping.
Yes.
Great. I tend to, in my full-time career, work with a number of people that live on what I would describe as the west side of town. And many of those people need to make their way out towards Lover's Lane. In order to say, to go from, say, Vine Street to Lover's Lane, approximately how long would that take and how many connections would they have to make?
2 connections. Had over an hour, which before would have took them about 2.5 hours.
Okay.
Takes an hour now, but before it took 2.5 hours? Okay.
Now they have the opportunity to get on more than one bus that goes to the mall, because 3 and 4 both go to the mall, in case they want to go somewhere else along that route.
And the mall is in a different location than Lover's Lane, I guess. I'm looking more out the other way, but it would be the same, not just the mall?
The connection at the mall is the connection that goes to Lover's Lane, because we only have one bus that goes out Lover's Lane,
So
which is the pink route.
if I look at the colors and the color to the routes, and I may be confused, I don't see only 2 colors that they would ride to get out to Lover's Lane.
No.
Oh, it'd take 2 connections, so they'd ride 3.
connections,
Thank you.
yes.
If I could count, that
Right.
would help.
They might originate on either the blue route or the red route, or the yellow route, but then primarily the Route 3, the green route, is the primary one that is used by passengers to connect with the pink route.
Got it.
And go out Lover's Lane. We're having requests to extend the hours out Lover's Lane, but that's another conversation. So.
Well, and I guess that's what it was going to be my next question is there a way to achieve more efficiency that would allow the buses to run both earlier and later. And that's why I started with the premise of if we can find efficiencies in running less miles, would that give us the opportunity to run a longer amount of time from daylight to dark kind of thing? Because the number one complaint that I hear, again, mostly from those people that I work with that would live where the blue route is that the bus doesn't run at a time that can get me to work, and it doesn't necessarily run at a time that can get me home from work. And then Mayor Wilkerson and I had a conversation about the 6,300 plus jobs that the chamber tells us that we don't have open right now. And then I'm talking to people who say, I'd like to go to work, but I don't have my own transportation to do so. And I'm trying to make those two meet up. And maybe that's not a discussion for right now, but it's a discussion that I would like to have.
It would take some more intense review to see if we could eliminate a route or part of a route in order to, as you said, spend that money elsewhere. And we'll be glad to do that.
Yeah, I would just, we have a multitude of places that people would go to work, and so it would be hard to consider all of them, but we have some very industrial areas, and at least from the chamber numbers that we're getting, those jobs tend to be clustered in those industrial areas. And I don't see a route that goes to either one of those, and that's not critical. It's just if we're trying to get people to work, and I am, both here and in my full-time professional life, my job is to get people to work, help them find work. I want to be able to say there's a way that you can get there. We can eliminate that barrier of not having transportation.
I believe that'll require a different type of service than fixed routes. And we'd need some mechanism to identify the origin of the willing and able workers to be able to develop a cost principle for it, but we'd be happy to work on that.
When I was growing up, I used to shuck corn, which was a terrible way to make a living, but it made a lot of money for a kid. And they used to pick us up on a street corner, and we'd hop in the back of a pickup truck, which I don't advise people do today, and they would take us to the field where we would do it. And it was very specialized in what they were doing to get us from point A to point B. Is that something that you would consider, that if all employees could get to, or if all residents who wanted to, who had jobs or wanted to pursue jobs in a particular industrial area, if they could all get to one location, would you consider one bus that would run on shift time to get people to and from?
Absolutely, and I would take it a step further and say it might not be feasible for them to all gather on one corner.
Sure.
So we could look at multiple corners that was still a feasible path of travel. The only challenge for us really would be knowing where they're located so that we could begin to develop the plan to make it feasible and as user-friendly as possible for the persons wanting to work and getting to work.
And I'm glad to hear you say multiple locations. My idea of only one came from a citizen that I talked to that said, I can get some transportation. I can't get all the way to where the job is, but I could catch a ride with somebody who's going in that direction that could get me closer. And then if I had a bus or some kind of transportation that would take me the rest of the way and could do so based upon that shift work time schedule, then it's not as if I always am afraid that people who don't have transportation, people will think, well, they're just not trying hard enough. Why don't you walk? Why don't you ride a bike? Well, that's all feasible in certain circumstances. I used to work with a young man who rode his bike over to his place of employment on Campbell Lane in the rain. And as soon as he arrived at his place of employment, they told him to go home because his uniform was soaked. And so, you know, I think when we really consider these things, we have to really get into the weeds, so to speak, of how we solve transportation problems. I'm glad to hear that you're willing to consider that.
You know, Slim, we might even discover that some of these places of business might be interested in supporting our efforts.
We talked about that before too, sure.
You know, maybe partially funding or providing even a transportation vehicle.
I know Soki Jobs has their name on a van that goes all the way out to the Trans Park to help people get transportation to that area. And they pay for that.
House.
We get quarterly reports. You report to us quarterly on information, don't you? Well, the ridership is part of that. I'm trying to remember whether or not it is. Okay. That'll help us keep track of what's going on because the trend's going the wrong way. And I'm not fussing at you. I told you I was going to fuss at you. I'm not fussing at you. The statistics are what they are, but we got to figure out how to do this better. And I'd suggest writing the guy who did the study last year for a refund because, man, it just went down every category you can look at.
No, we've done a few route realignments since I started with the transit in 2001, and it's I guess widely known in the transit industry that you expect a little dip initially when you realign the routes until people learn how to use them. You don't expect it to just keep going downhill. And we certainly tried to give it a reasonable amount of time to see if it would rebound. And then in between other duties, because I did comment we'd worked the better part of 5 months on it, but certainly weren't free to work all day, every day on it. But we really wanted to look at ridership data from before and which stops were well used, meaning well needed, we thought. And we believe we've put a good plan together here.
Look forward to seeing the increases.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Tooling? Appreciate your time. Sorry I had to wait so long to get to us.
Thank you. Well, that's all right. We learned a lot sitting here, and thank you all for everything you do to support transit. We very much appreciate it. As a person who grew up very poor and walked everywhere, I understand what learning to drive and get my own car did for my life.
Right. That's the last item on our agenda, so we have time for public comments. If you have a comment for the city, this would be the time. And Mr. Thompson, you're first. I made you wait a while ago. I'm sorry. But
Thompson, 1213 Shawnee Way, Bowling Green, Kentucky, 42104. I got overruled because I was out of place in the order this afternoon, so my comment is a little history lesson right now. Regency apartments were built probably 15 years ago on Campbell Lane, and their exit was onto Thoroughbred. The next development that came along was College Suites. They emptied out to Thoroughbred. They, by I guess the binding elements at that time, built 3 fences around their apartments. They closed off 2 streets. The 2 streets were in Allendale Heights. One was Glenview, and the other one was Rosewood Way. They're closed off now, no more. The next thing that came along was Shawnee Estates. On the backside, we had two working streets. One was Shawnee Way, and the other was Navajo. Some of the neighbors there thought that too much traffic, fast traffic going through there, so they petitioned the city commission to close the streets, which they did. Shawnee is closed, Navajo is closed. They were working streets at the time. They gave us what they called connectivity. Connectivity. That means that we can get from one subdivision into another one without going 4 miles out of the way. Connectivity went down that day. Shawnee Way was closed off. Navajo was closed off. We couldn't get to the shopping center. We had to get out on Small House Road. We had to get out on Campbell Lane. You're making left turns all the way down there out of Shawnee. So this just added more traffic to Shawnee by having us go out on Small House and Campbell Lane. Now, Mr. Joe Plum, I think he reiterated today that they didn't take too much of account on Campbell Lane. But in a forum there last week, we were discussing things, and he said that, and I believe I'm right in quoting him, he can call me if he wants to, that Campbell Lane had as much traffic as the Scottsville Road does. Well, last week, every gripe and complaint that was lodged was about Scottsville Road traffic. And he says that Campbell Lane has as much traffic nearly as Scottsville Road. But anyway, here we go from two working streets that are closed. We have two dead-end streets that are closed. Then we come down to Mohawk that has a dead-end street right off of Thimblefinger Lane. Tonight, y'all passed 3-2 to let them build the apartment complex. That's fine. I don't have no gripe with that. That's a good deal. But I would like to see Mohawk closed at the end of the street now where it dead ends. In the future there, on the street itself there, we have a sign that says no trucks weight 26,000 pounds. Well, these people are going to put up with everything in the world the next year with heavy trucks and everything that's going through there. I would love to see Mohawk closed. I don't know how to get it closed, what procedure to start. Mr. Harmon probably could tell me. But I recommend that we close Mohawk for future. Have all of y'all been out to view this section of town there? Thank you. I hope that you'll consider this in here, closing of the street. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I'm sorry you had to wait earlier. Appreciate you sticking around. Is anyone else?
Good evening. I'm Michael Gramling. I'm a own and operate a business on 310 East Main Street. When I was here 2 weeks ago to present the Citizens Proclamation Against Hate Crime, I thanked, and the people behind me thanked you, Mr. Mayor, for the statements that you made immediately following the hate crime at Crown Apartments. I want to repeat that. We do appreciate that. The reason that we organized this proclamation, and the reason we continue to organize around the proclamation, is that we take issue with the notion that it is one small individual. If it were one small-minded individual, there would not be such a huge spike in hate crime in this town and across the United States since the most recent presidential election. There's a very, very loud voice coming from Washington, D.C. It can't be any more evident that on the wall of Crown Apartments, right next to the racial slur, was the slogan, "Make America Great Again." We organized the proclamation because we believe it is our responsibility to try to drown out that voice. And that voice can be drowned out by collective action from people all over this community, ordinary people. And that is what we intend to do. And Mr. Mayor, we agree with you that we think this community is outraged by that particular act. We want the community to understand how important it is to be vigilant and to understand the root causes of that attack. On the sidewalk, after I was done speaking and all of us were done speaking, I talked to one of the commissioners who said that they all agreed with your statement, Mr. Mayor, and but that we could certainly not expect them to expect you, any of you, to attack the President of the United States. And I replied, I said, well, that's not what the proclamation asks for. The proclamation asks that you are able, in this toxic political climate, to distinguish right from wrong. And I think this evening that's what Mr. Nash and all of you were able to do. And I think you took an important step in drowning out those voices of hate. So thank you.
Our next meeting is scheduled March 20th, 2018. Thank you for tuning in.